Some people believe rules don't apply to them and that their judgment outweighs professional expertise. These stories reveal what happens when entitlement drives people to take matters into their own hands, turning minor grievances into fatal encounters with forces beyond their control. It was July 4th, 2016, at Riverside Park in Denver, Colorado. The annual fireworks display was scheduled to begin at 9 p.m., with professional pyrotechnicians setting up equipment inside a secured launch zone, with spectators positioned several hundred feet away behind multiple safety buffers. Jennifer Martinez, 35, lived in a house directly adjacent to the park and was hosting her annual 4th of July barbecue. Martinez was known among neighbors for filing frequent complaints with city departments about noise violations, permit issues, and property boundary disputes. Building management records showed she had contacted the city attorney's office multiple times regarding public events near her property. That evening, Martinez had been drinking wine throughout her party when the pyrotechnic crew arrived at 7 p.m. to begin setup. Witnesses observed her immediately leave her guests and march to the park, carrying a wine glass and demanding to speak with the event supervisor. Security footage from nearby businesses captured Martinez gesturing emphatically while speaking to the supervisor, pointing toward her house and waving documentation. Martinez insisted that as a permanent resident, she deserved consideration and that the city should reschedule the fireworks to accommodate her private event. When the supervisor explained that the fireworks were a permitted city event, Martinez demanded to see his credentials and threatened to file a complaint with City Hall. Frustrated with the lack of response from officials, Martinez walked around the safety barrier and entered the work area. She approached the equipment staging area, demanding the lead pyrotechnician explain why they were proceeding despite her objections. The pyrotechnician repeatedly asked her to leave the restricted area, but Martinez insisted that, as a taxpayer and property owner, she had the right to have her concerns addressed. The crew was in the process of loading shells into mortar tubes for the evening's display. Several tubes had already been loaded and electrically primed, positioned at precise angles for the choreographed show. Martinez began interfering with their work, claiming she needed to document safety violations for her complaint to the city council. The crew supervisor ordered her to stop and leave immediately, but Martinez refused. In her agitation, Martinez stumbled backward and knocked over a loaded mortar tube that had been positioned for the finale sequence. The tube, containing a 4-inch aerial shell that had already been electrically primed and seated in the mortar, toppled and rotated horizontally toward the staging area. The pyrotechnician lunged to right the tube, but the ignition system activated as the mortar shifted out of position. The shell fired horizontally across the staging area at ground level, traveling approximately 30 feet before striking a stack of equipment cases. Martinez, standing directly in the projectile's path, was struck at close range as the shell detonated almost simultaneously. The explosion knocked Martinez backward into a storage area containing cardboard packaging, which immediately caught fire. Burning chemical compounds from the shell adhered to her clothing and exposed skin. Crew members used fire extinguishers to suppress the flames around her within 30 seconds. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 6 minutes, but found Martinez with third-degree burns over 35% of her body and severe respiratory damage from inhaling superheated chemical gases. She died 90 minutes later at the local hospital from respiratory failure and thermal shock. Martinez's cell phone, recovered from the staging area, contained photos of pyrotechnic equipment time-stamped at 8:23 p.m., moments before the accident. The fire department investigation concluded that Martinez had deliberately interfered with professional pyrotechnic operations after multiple warnings to leave the restricted area. It was March 15, 2017, at Lakeside Apartments in Chicago. A severe thunderstorm had settled over the city, bringing wind gusts up to 45 miles per hour and heavy rain that caused widespread power outages. As the temperature hovered at 42 degrees Fahrenheit and rain continued to flood the streets, the building lost power at 8:30 p.m. Carol Brennan, 53, had a small accounting firm and was known for her impatience and frequent involvement in maintenance matters. Building management records documented multiple complaints from Brennan about service response times, utility interruptions, and maintenance procedures. Brennan often questioned maintenance workers about their procedures and demanded explanations for routine building operations. That evening, she had been working when the power failed and immediately began calculating potential business losses from the interruption. Frustrated by the outage and the disruption to her evening, she put on her raincoat and headed straight to the basement to confront the maintenance crew about the situation. She found two electricians preparing to address the main electrical panel by flashlight. Heavy rain had been seeping through basement windows for several hours, creating 2 inches of standing water mixed with debris across the concrete floor. Brennan immediately began questioning the electricians about the cause of the outage and insisted that repairs be completed without delay. The electricians explained that the storm had caused the outage and that they needed to pump out the water before beginning any electrical work for safety reasons. Brennan immediately offered to help while complaining about her spoiled food and missed work calls. She threatened to report them to the landlord for taking too long and demanded they prioritize her apartment since she was a long-term tenant. The electricians politely asked her to wait upstairs, but Brennan persisted, hovering nearby and insisting she needed to supervise their work. She continued following them around, offering unsolicited assistance while repeatedly mentioning the personal hardships the outage was causing her. After 45 minutes of pumping, most of the water had been removed, but moisture remained on the concrete floor. The electricians inspected their immediate workspace and determined, under pressure from building management and escalating tenant complaints, to briefly test one circuit for emergency lighting despite incomplete drying. The electricians noticed that the storm had caused water to seep into the main panel housing, but they believed the individual circuit they were testing was isolated from the damaged sections. They warned Brennan one final time to stay at least 10 feet away from all electrical equipment. Both electricians later stated they hesitated to physically intervene, citing company policy and concerns about legal liability. As the electricians prepared to restore power, Brennan positioned herself closer, claiming she needed to ensure her apartment would be restored first. She dragged a metal step stool over to get a better view of their work, placing it on the damp concrete while threatening to call the building owner if they didn't address her unit immediately. When power was restored to the test circuit, electrical current traveled through the compromised panel housing and the wet concrete floor. Brennan, standing on a metal stool that sat partially submerged on damp concrete in contact with the energized panel, received a severe electrical shock. The storm damage had compromised the panel's grounding, allowing electrical current to travel through the stool and into her body. The current passed through her body for approximately 3 seconds before the circuit breaker tripped. She collapsed immediately, falling backward onto the concrete floor in cardiac arrest. The electricians immediately shut off all power and began CPR, but Brennan remained unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived 18 minutes later due to storm-related delays throughout the city. Brennan was found unconscious, with severe electrical burns on her hands and feet, where the current had entered and exited her body. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but she was pronounced dead at the scene from cardiac arrest caused by electrical shock. The building implemented new policies requiring all residents to evacuate basement areas during any electrical maintenance work. It was August 22, 2015, at a small outpatient imaging center in Houston, Texas. The afternoon was hot and humid, and the sun was beating down on the parking lot. The clinic's waiting room was quiet, with only a few patients scheduled for late-day MRI scans. Sharon Davis, 49, had brought her elderly mother to the center for a routine MRI. Davis was known for questioning medical procedures and demanding detailed explanations from healthcare providers. Medical records showed she had previously filed complaints with patient advocacy groups about perceived discrimination in healthcare settings. She maintained detailed documentation of medical interactions and had previously requested to observe procedures to ensure proper care. That afternoon, she arrived early, carrying a large purse and a folder of insurance paperwork and medical forms. When the technician called her mother's name, Davis insisted on accompanying her into the preparation area. She questioned whether the technicians would provide proper attention to her elderly Hispanic mother during the procedure. The technician assured her they would provide excellent care and asked Davis to wait in the designated area. But Davis argued that as a family member paying for the service, she had the right to ensure her mother wasn't being treated as a second-class patient. As the staff prepared her mother for the scan, Davis became increasingly suspicious that they were cutting corners. She accused them of not positioning her mother as carefully as they would for other patients and demanded they redo the setup. When the technician stepped away to retrieve additional positioning equipment, Davis saw her opportunity. She entered the MRI room to personally ensure her mother was being treated with the same attention she believed other patients received. A portable oxygen cylinder sat unsecured near the entrance after earlier maintenance work. Davis, focused entirely on monitoring the procedure, moved closer to the machine without noticing the cylinder. The powerful magnetic field immediately pulled the 40-pound oxygen cylinder across the room at high velocity. The cylinder struck Davis in the torso, pinning her against the MRI bore with tremendous force. The impact knocked the wind out of her and trapped her between the cylinder and the machine. The technician, hearing the loud crash, rushed back and saw Davis pinned against the equipment. The technician immediately initiated an emergency quench, but the magnetic field could not be neutralized instantly. Davis was trapped for approximately 25 seconds, long enough to cause catastrophic crushing injuries, while the cylinder pressed against her chest and abdomen. The weight compressed her ribcage, and panic set in as she realized she couldn't free herself. The magnetic pull was too strong for her to push the cylinder away. When the magnetic field was finally discharged, staff quickly removed the oxygen cylinder and found Davis conscious but in severe distress. She complained of intense chest pain and difficulty breathing. The impact had fractured several ribs and caused internal bleeding, while the prolonged compression had restricted her breathing and caused panic-induced respiratory distress. Emergency medical personnel arrived within 8 minutes. Davis was found with severe chest trauma, multiple rib fractures, and signs of internal bleeding. She was transported to a local hospital, but died 90 minutes later from complications related to blunt force trauma and respiratory failure caused by the crushing injury. Medical staff provided statements confirming that Davis had accused them of providing substandard care based on her mother's demographics before entering the restricted area. The facility's review determined that standard procedures had been followed and that Davis's actions stemmed from unfounded discrimination claims. It was October 18, 2014, at a family-owned Italian restaurant in a Las Vegas suburb. The evening was mild, with temperatures in the low 70s and a steady flow of customers filling the dining room. The restaurant's kitchen and basement utility area were busy with staff preparing for the dinner rush. Nancy Rodriguez, 42, was dining with her husband and 2 friends. Rodriguez was known for her critical approach to restaurant operations and had previously left detailed negative reviews focusing on safety concerns rather than food quality. She maintained a mental catalog of restaurant visits, rating establishments on perceived safety violations and staff competence rather than food or service quality. Earlier that evening, she had already criticized the restaurant's table spacing and questioned whether the kitchen staff were following proper food safety protocols. Restaurant security cameras captured her photographing various areas of the dining room and taking notes throughout the meal. During dinner, Rodriguez noticed a faint odor she believed was natural gas. She immediately flagged down the restaurant manager and insisted there was a dangerous leak. The manager checked the area and explained that the gas system had been inspected recently and was functioning properly. Rodriguez became frustrated that her concern wasn't being taken seriously and demanded immediate action. When the manager declined to evacuate the building, she insisted she would handle the situation herself since the staff clearly wasn't competent enough to address a potential safety issue. Rodriguez followed the manager to the basement, where the restaurant's water heater, furnace, and gas meter were located. The manager pointed out that all equipment was up to code and that no leaks were present. Rodriguez began inspecting various gas connections, convinced she could identify the problem that the incompetent staff had missed. She became increasingly agitated that no one was taking her seriously and decided she would have to solve the problem herself, since clearly no one else was capable of handling the situation properly. Frustrated by the staff's inaction, Rodriguez picked up a wrench from a nearby toolbox and completely disconnected the gas valve from the water heater, stating she would fix the problem herself since no one else seemed capable of doing their job properly. The manager stopped her, but she pushed him away and threatened to sue if he touched her. As she completely disconnected the valve, natural gas began pouring into the enclosed basement space. Within minutes, the strong odor reached the dining room, causing several customers to complain about the smell. Rodriguez remained in the basement, continuing to manipulate the valve and insisting she was fixing the problem. The manager began evacuating customers from the dining room while shouting warnings about a gas leak. The gas concentration quickly reached dangerous levels. As gas saturated the enclosed basement, a spark from the water heater's ignition system triggered a violent explosion that destroyed much of the basement and damaged the restaurant's first floor. The blast was heard by customers in the dining room and by nearby businesses. Emergency responders arrived within 10 minutes. Rodriguez was found near the gas meter with severe burns covering most of her body and was pronounced dead at the scene. 3 customers upstairs suffered minor injuries from falling debris, and several others were treated for smoke inhalation. The manager sustained a concussion from being knocked down by the blast while evacuating the dining room. The coroner's report listed Rodriguez's cause of death as thermal injuries and smoke inhalation from the explosion and subsequent fire. The fire marshal's report concluded that all systems were operating safely until Rodriguez's unauthorized modifications caused the leak. Following extensive repairs, the restaurant reopened 2 months later with upgraded safety monitoring and restricted access to utility areas. It was January 12, 2018, at a commercial laundry facility in Detroit, Michigan. Rows of industrial washing machines and dryers lined the production floor, each machine capable of handling several hundred pounds of laundry per cycle. Deborah Kim, 44, owned a small catering business and was preparing for her first major corporate event. Kim had never used this facility before, but needed industrial cleaning for her uniforms and tablecloths. Kim was known for her meticulous approach to vendor relationships and had previously terminated contracts with service providers over cleanliness concerns. Earlier that morning, Kim had arrived an hour before her scheduled appointment to observe the facility's operations firsthand. She watched other customers' loads being processed, determined to ensure this new facility met her standards before trusting them with her most important order. She explained to the floor supervisor that this was for her biggest catering contract ever, and demanded to know how they prevented mixing her uniforms with hospital linens or restaurant rags from other clients. Kim insisted on seeing exactly how her items would be processed separately, claiming she couldn't risk any contamination that might jeopardize her reputation. Convinced that her uniforms were being mixed with contaminated items, Kim followed an employee through the production floor to ensure her load was processed separately. She stopped at one of the large industrial dryers and noticed it contained linens from what appeared to be a medical facility. Kim demanded the employee re-clean the entire drum, and when told it was already sanitized, she insisted on personally inspecting it. She stepped into the drum opening to conduct her own inspection, refusing to trust the staff's cleaning standards. The employee tried to explain that the machine had been cleaned between loads, but Kim refused to believe it. She continued to reach inside, wiping down the drum walls and insisting she could see contamination. As the employee turned to get the supervisor to address her concerns, Kim became convinced she saw contamination at the very back of the drum. Unknown to Kim, the dryer had just completed a high-heat cycle and was still rotating during its cool-down phase. She crawled inside to reach the far end, determined to inspect every inch before allowing her uniforms to be processed. The drum continued rotating at low speed, while residual heat remained inside the chamber, and a maintenance fault had disabled the door interlock system. Kim was trapped as the drum tumbled, designed to agitate heavy commercial loads. Employees heard banging and muffled screams from inside the machine and immediately pressed the emergency stop button, but the safety lock prevented the door from opening. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes and used override tools to force open the drum after approximately 15 minutes of Kim being trapped inside. Kim was found unresponsive inside the drum, having suffered a combination of blunt force trauma, positional asphyxia, and heat exhaustion from being tumbled against the metal drum in the hot, oxygen-depleted environment. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as multiple traumatic injuries sustained during prolonged tumbling in the industrial dryer. Equipment inspection revealed that a recent maintenance error had disabled the dryer's door interlock system, allowing the machine to continue operating despite the open door and abnormal load. It was September 8, 2013, at a mid-rise office building in Seattle, Washington. The afternoon was overcast and cool, while the building housed a mix of small businesses and professional offices with an original HVAC system circulating air through metal ducts above the ceiling tiles. Brenda Foster, 51, had a small accounting firm on the third floor. She had sent multiple emails demanding immediate action and threatened to break her lease if the problem wasn't resolved. She was known for her persistent complaints about building maintenance and her tendency to involve herself in issues beyond her office suite. Building management records documented numerous complaints from Foster about air quality, temperature control, and maintenance response times. She often confronted maintenance workers in hallways and demanded explanations for routine building operations. On the afternoon of September 8th, Foster arrived at work carrying a portable air quality monitor and a flashlight, determined to investigate the building's ventilation system on her own. After a brief conversation with the building's maintenance supervisor, who assured her that the HVAC system had been inspected and was functioning properly, Foster grew impatient. She insisted that the only way to identify the problem was to check the ducts directly. Ignoring the supervisor's warnings about safety and access restrictions, Foster located a utility closet on her floor and removed a ceiling tile to access the ventilation shaft. The ductwork was designed for air circulation, not human access, with dimensions of approximately 24 inches by 18 inches. Foster climbed onto a chair and hoisted herself into the duct, carrying her air quality monitor and flashlight. She began crawling through the narrow space, moving away from the utility closet and into a section of ductwork that ran above the main hallway. The metal walls echoed with every movement, and dust and insulation fibers filled the air. As Foster continued, the duct narrowed to accommodate a structural beam, reducing the available space to less than 16 inches in height. She attempted to squeeze through, but her shoulders became wedged between the metal walls. Foster tried to back out, but her clothing caught on a seam in the duct, and she became stuck. The confined space compressed her chest, restricting her ability to breathe properly, and her breathing grew labored as she struggled to free herself. Building occupants on the third floor began to notice muffled banging and faint calls for help coming from above the hallway ceiling. Several employees searched for the source of the noise, but were unable to locate Foster. The maintenance supervisor, realizing she was missing, checked the utility closet and found the ceiling tile removed and Foster's purse left behind. Emergency responders were called, and a search of the building began. It took nearly 3 hours for rescue teams to locate Foster in the ductwork, as the building's original plans did not match the current layout after years of renovations. By the time firefighters reached her, Foster was unresponsive. She had been trapped for approximately 2 to 3 hours, and the combination of restricted chest expansion, panic-induced hyperventilation, and physical exhaustion had caused respiratory failure. Foster was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as positional asphyxia due to chest compression in a confined space, with contributing factors including panic and physical exhaustion. Building management implemented new policies restricting access to utility closets and mechanical spaces, and additional signage was installed to warn tenants equals. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here.